Hello and welcome to the Final Frontiersmen, a YouTube channel about all things Trek with a heavy focus on the Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. I'm Bill, and today we are going to be reviewing the latest release for the game called the Federation-Klingon War Tactical Campaign. This is a very different product than anything that has come before in the Star Trek Adventures line, and I have taken about 10 pages worth of notes here, so hopefully I could get through it efficiently. Before I do that, first, of course, this is a review, so if you've never caught our reviews before, we use the alert system as we go through the products. First, yellow alert for things that we think you should pay attention to and might be of interest to some people. Red alerts for the things that we think are really great, and the rarely used black alert for the things that are groundbreaking and game-changing. This book has a lot of game-changing elements in it, and we are going to get into that soon. But one thing before I do, I have two quick disclaimers I need to bring out before I start. First, number one, this book, Federation-Klingon War Tactical Campaign, probably just be calling it Tactical Campaign from here on out. The lead writer, Al Spader, who has been on the channel before and may be back on very soon, he was kind enough to get in contact with Jim Johnson and Modifius, and they sent me a copy of the PDF to review. So that was very kind of them. So I did receive this copy of the PDF to read through for this review. So thank you, Al. Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Modifius. The second thing I need to point out, or the second disclaimer, probably if I get into a rant, I'm going to put it at the end of the video if I even remember to do it. But the one big disclaimer I want to put out, this is based on the Federation-Klingon War as seen in Star Trek Discovery. We all know Star Trek Discovery still is very contentious. There's a lot of mixed feelings. There's a lot of strong feelings about it one way or the other. I just want to point out again that this book is not Star Trek Discovery. Okay? Regardless of your feelings on it, regardless of the fact that it is using the plot of the war from Star Trek Discovery, this is a Star Trek Adventures role-playing game product, and it has all the quality and utility that you can find in every single book put out by Modifius for this line. You are not playing Star Trek Discovery. You are playing your own adventures on your own ship. It just uses this most recent war from Star Trek TV shows as the basis to establish this tactical campaign. But like every single product by Modifius for Star Trek Adventures, it can be adapted to any setting you want. And even if you play it in this time period as is, you're not playing Discovery. So if you have strong feelings against Discovery, don't write off this book right away, like unfortunately the original Star Trek Discovery Season 1-2 campaign book was written off by a lot of people. I'll get into my rant later if I do at the very end of the video. Now's not the time for it, but for the people who need to hear it, you're not playing Discovery, you're playing this tactical campaign, which is a toolbox for every Star Trek Adventures game that you could use and adapt as you like. With that out of the way, we have a massive review to get into, and I want to do this fast. I'm going to jump into the small window and hopefully put up some relevant images on the screen there for you to look at. So, here we go. Federation-Klingon War Tactical Campaign starts out easily enough with the introduction that is going to tell you what the book is about, but more importantly, it has a list of essential viewing episodes. Of course, because this is the Federation-Klingon War, it has a lot of very prominent episodes from Star Trek Discovery Season 1, but also the other huge war that took up a lot of Star Trek television history was the Dominion War, and it has an essential viewing list of those episodes as well if you want to host your tactical campaign during the Dominion War or during that Next Generation TNG DS9 time period. So it covers both sides, but this book is going to be aimed as if you're playing the original Federation-Klingon War as appeared during the timeline of Star Trek Discovery. So moving into Chapter 1, Chapter 1 is going to be all of the character options. You start out with 6 new species, and these are some pretty deep cuts for these species. I saw most of them. I recognized most of them. I think there was one that I wasn't sure where I had seen them or if I had seen them before. I recognized them, but they are species that I've seen in the background or seen in passing during movies, and I never really knew who they were. They were just fancy looking alien. Now I know they were fleshed out in like books, comics, whatever, what have you, but now we have them front and center, and most of them, I would say 5 of the 6 I would consider deep cuts. But you have the A&R, which are just, if you have what was it, Strange New Worlds, if you know Hemmer, the engineer from season 1, type of Andorian race. So the A&R, the blind, kind of psychic Andorians. The Arcadians, which I saw in Star Trek 4, never knew who they were. The Ariolo, I don't know if I'm even saying these names properly because I don't really know them. The Betelgeusian or Betelgeusian, however you would like to describe it. Don't say it 3 times or Michael Keaton will appear. The Coridanites, or Coridanites, again, I don't really even know how to say them. And the Megarite, am I right? So you have those 6 new species added to the game, expanding the types of characters you could create. Again, pretty deep cuts, but still very interesting, and it's always good to have many options for creating your characters. Moving on, this is a tactical campaign, this book, and that maybe doesn't mean anything right now, but it's going to be the bulk of what this book is about. This is not a regular campaign. So the rest of this chapter goes into creating a wartime character, not just for these 6 species, but you could apply all across the board for Star Trek Adventures if you're making your character during a time of war. It has advice for creating characters with traits and all sorts of other things. So wartime traits, for example, just going through what the traits may be, looking here, there's diplomat, militia, nonviolent, resistor, opportunist, prisoner of war, refugee, soldier, undercover, war criminal, and war researcher. So different traits for your character operating, existing in a time of war. You have wartime values. So it gives some examples of what would be values for a character living in wartime. For example, don't allow anyone else to die. Every shadow an enemy. Take any deal for peace, even the bad deal. So those kinds of values that would be shaped and forged from living a life of war. Also, wartime focuses. There's random table for having wartime or generating wartime focuses based on each discipline: command, con, security. So if you want to roll up a focus, if you can't think of one, or you want some ideas for wartime. And of course, when you build your character, the career path, it has some new career events that reflect wartime that you could use as you are constructing your character at the beginning of the game. So it goes into explaining what the wartime talents are, and it goes into wartime roles. So the kinds of characters who are prominent, or you would see, or would play a bigger role during wartime campaigns than possibly in standard Star Trek Adventures campaigns. They have as these wartime specializations, possibly admirals, ambassadors, armory officers, combat engineers, field medics, heavy weapons specialists, intelligence agents, ordnance experts, political liaison, reconnaissance, squad leader, tactical officer. Each of these comes with a role ability, just like your standard roles like Commander, XO, Con. One thing to point out, though, the intelligence agent role is the only one in the list I know that did not have a role ability. That was conspicuously absent. I don't know if it's intentional or if it's an oversight, but intelligence agent did not have a role ability associated with it. But then it also gives information about how to reflect wartime in standard roles. Again, the CO, the XO, the CMO, all the roles that you have in a normal starship, but now playing them in wartime. Moving on, it goes into weapons and gear that appear during wartime, or even ways of using weapons during wartime, such as setting phasers to stun on the starship for planetary bombardment and trying to stun an entire city or a village down on the surface, defensive fire, suppressing fire, modifying torpedoes in various ways, whole sorts of planetary defenses, and also fixed energy weapons like railguns. They are not adjustable. You have to aim your ship to fire these weapons. Those are some examples of the technology that you will find in this chapter. After that, this I am giving a red alert. The next section is about the trauma of war. So it has brand new rules in here for a trauma system, because war is traumatic. War is shocking. War is something that haunts you possibly for the rest of your life, certainly when you're going through it. So this has a new system to reflect that in the game, where going with your values, like normally in the game you could use your value, you could have a challenge value, or your value may reflect negatively on the situation, may hold you back from doing it. Now, in situations where a value or dictate or your directive would impact a situation negatively, instead of the usual negative value use that you will encounter in the game, the GM can choose to suppress the value. This is a new concept added in this tactical campaign, value suppression. So the GM can choose to suppress a value in this situation where that value would be negative. And what happens when your value gets suppressed? And there's a good example in the book. If you're not really sure what I'm talking about, when you get the book, you can read the example. It will be perfectly clear. But when your value gets suppressed, you have three choices. You can ignore the suppression, which means you have to spend a point of determination to ignore your value getting suppressed in this situation. Or you can gain a complication. Gaining the complication, unlike perhaps a normal situation where your value is used negatively, you do not gain determination in this situation. Or you could challenge the suppressed value. Now, if you challenge the suppressed value, you do gain a point of determination. However, you gain something that is called a scar. And actually, I'm giving scars a black alert. This is something major. This is something very new added into the mechanics for Star Trek Adventures. Scars. Scars are permanent complications on your character, or maybe semi-permanent is a better way of saying it. They're permanent complications on your character, which means they follow you from game to game to game to game. You have this complication on you at all times, like a negative trait. You're carrying this scar with you. And what happens the first time that, of course, like a regular complication, it's going to increase difficulty or maybe prevent you from doing something. But the first time that it increases the difficulty for you in a session, in an episode, you will gain a point of determination. That's a pretty good thing, even though it means you're constantly carrying this negative thing around with you constantly. And that's always the first time, or only the first time, that it affects you in the game. Now, again, you can get scars through having suppressed values, challenging a suppressed value. However, they can also be gained through actual traumatic circumstances that pop up in the narrative that your character experiences. So like real scars, it could be physical, it could be mental, it could be psychological, emotional. These are things that it doesn't just have to be through value suppression. It could be through the natural course of the horrific things that are going to happen to your character in this war. You gain a scar and it stays with you. Now, here's where it gets a little shocking, because the war scenario, the tactical campaign, which is all war, you could gain multiple scars. You could gain scar after scar after scar. You may be put in some horrific situations where you are gaining a lot of scars. If you have more scars than you have values, your character is essentially dead. And I don't mean that in the physical way as they lost their life, but as in you retire that character. They are unable to continue any further. They are too injured. They are too psychologically broken. They are too damaged from what they have experienced in the war that they are out of the campaign. You have lost that character. So this is another potential means, aside from dying, of player elimination in Star Trek Adventures. So this is kind of shocking and devastating new twist to values and what happens to value use. And that's why I think it deserves a black alert, because it really adds in the weight, the seriousness of what it means to be serving in wartime and the horrors that you're going to face. Now, the reason why I said that I say these are maybe semi-permanent instead of permanent complications on you, there are ways to rewrite the scar, to try to shift it in a different direction and try cope with it by focusing the problem elsewhere. Doesn't really improve it. Or also remove the scar entirely. Now, how they could be removed or changed in this way is via milestones through the character development. Now, in the original core rulebook, you have your milestones, your spotlight milestone, and your arc milestone, which could move kind of slowly the way it's set up for, especially if there's multiple characters who have scars and they want to get rid of them. Characters don't really advance that quickly in the original core rulebook development system. This introduces, the book introduces a new way. Let me get the red alert back here, because we're back about the original thing. We're just here in the trauma of war. The accelerated development rule on here, which allows characters a chance to level up or develop slightly faster than they would in the original rules, where you could swap out a milestone for a spotlight milestone. So even if you didn't earn a spotlight milestone, you could count a milestone as a spotlight milestone. And a spotlight milestone grants you an ability to rewrite your scar as if you would rewrite a challenge value. But an arc milestone, which the more spotlight milestones you have, the faster you get to an arc milestone. An arc milestone you can use to erase the scar. You've achieved, it's a hard thing to obtain, the arc milestone. So your reward you could take for that is, if you have a scar, you could get rid of it. So there is accelerated development that's designed to help you move faster, not just to gain more skills as you would in a wartime setting, because necessity is the mother of invention, but also to give you a chance to get rid of scars before it does eliminate your character, worst comes to worst. Now, there's no mention here about how to adapt this for if you're playing the with the new development rules that were introduced in the Klingon core rulebook, which my group uses. So there's nothing on advanced development or accelerated development yet, nothing official. Personally, I don't really think it needs anything additional added to it, because the advancement rules in the Klingon core rulebook are much faster overall than the ones in the core rulebook. So I don't think you need a way to speed it up. However, I think that I was talking with Al a little bit on online about how to remove scars, and talking about probably using it as a reward for a a character arc would make sense, and that's pretty comparable and still probably even faster than doing it in the original core rulebook system. But for those of you using the Klingon core rulebook version, updated version of how to do character development, there's not really a lot you would need to change in order to accommodate these rules. So really don't have to adjust anything at all, and maybe just add as a character arc reward the ability to cancel one of the scars that you have. Possibly. Nothing official. That was just through our chatter and discussing it with the other writers in the book. So take that for what you will. So standing down, red alert, and I'm going to move instead into a yellow alert because I think this is something else that needs a little attention brought to it. The next part is casualty reports. So this is another new thing added to the game. Again, everything in here to reflect playing during the time of war. After a battle, you will roll challenge dice to determine any crew injuries or deaths that occurred per each department in the battle. So each crew member that gets killed via this dice roll, if you roll like, yes, there's one person who died in the engineering department, there's a couple people injured in this department, but you do have a death in your crew, the rules state that each killed crew member you must come up with a report, a casualty report. So each crew member that's killed must be named in the report, and you must write something about who that character was. It could be how they died, it could be who they were as a person, something about their family, what they liked, anything. These cannot just be faceless, nameless casualties off screen. The point of this is to reflect the seriousness and the gravity of war. It's not Yahoo cowboys just firing laser guns and having fun blasting things with no concern about who's dying. If someone dies on your ship, you are going to have to name who that person is, even if you've never known that character before, and you're going to have to talk about them in this casualty report. This can also, of course, be traumatic for characters and lead to scars for them, depending on who is killed on the ship, who's killed in the battle. I think that is a really important thing to add to this game in this system, especially for a war system, because you shouldn't take this topic lightly. War should not be crazy fun, wild lasers exploding. You should know the seriousness and feel the seriousness. So I like that they added that into here. Standing down, yellow alert, and just ending the chapter with advice on playing on this type of campaign, especially playing the trauma aspect, and also how to approach it with your players as a GM to make sure everybody is comfortable. There's a lot that could be very, very upsetting to different players in playing a campaign such as this. So this gives advice on how to broach this kind of campaign with your players and setting limits for what everyone is comfortable with. Because again, even though we're reflecting the seriousness, we're seeing exactly how devastating and traumatic war is. This is still a game. It's meant to be fun, and you don't want to push anyone over the line. People want to play the game to escape and to relax and to get into this fictional world. We don't want to come out of the game with our own lingering trauma. So good advice how to have in here. And it also has advice on player versus player conflict, which might come up in a wartime scenario, especially if there's any kind of double agents that are in your crew. Again, very sensitive things, very delicate things that GMs need to work with. Lots of advice on it here. There we go. That's chapter 1. It's a big book. Okay, chapter 2, Gamemastering the campaign. So in this chapter, it talks about how to just prepare for the tactical campaign. And again, you might be thinking, what is the tactical campaign? We're getting there. We're getting there. Just hang on with me. So it talks about setting up session 0 on the safety checklist. Again, the safety tools, like we just mentioned at the end of chapter 1, how to make sure everyone is ready for this type of war campaign. It talks about planning the campaign, the details that lead up to the war, talking about the scripted events, because this is based on the actual Klingon Federation War from the first season of Star Trek Discovery, where we know there are certain key events that happen throughout the length of this war. Those are scripted events. Those will happen, and they will be reported to the players in various ways, maybe as a communique from the Admiralty, maybe as a Federation news report, but those key events are going to still occur. So it talks about those here. It talks about elements that happen in the tactical campaign. It which like points of interest. Those are going to be huge things. Points of interest, flawed successes, serious setbacks. Now, here's the thing. I don't want to say it's a complaint about this chapter or a gripe about this chapter, but it's a lingering thought that I had. I'm losing my voice suddenly. It's a lingering thought I had through my head as I was reading through chapter 2 and then into chapter 3. A lot of the things they're talking about, you're reading about, so in the tactical campaign, points of interest, flawed successes, blah, blah, blah. I'm getting the details, but I don't know what it means yet. It's not introduced yet. All of this is coming in chapter 3. Chapter 3 is about how to play the tactical campaign, and that breaks down everything in details. But through this chapter, it's mentioning points of interest, and I'm thinking, I get the gist of it, but I don't know what it is, so I can't really fully make a picture in my mind of what or how important this information is at the moment. And serious setback, flawed success, what are those? Campaign is broken down into 3 parts. Okay, you get the broad strokes, but I felt like I don't really know what's going on yet. I'm not lost, mind you, but I feel like I wish I knew what the tactical campaign was first before I heard this. Now, the reason why I say, I know it sounds like I'm whining there, but the reason why I say this is not a complaint, because then when I get into chapter 3 next, and it's explaining the entire tactical campaign, what it is, how it's structured, how it's set up, I was glad I knew the terminology before I got to there, so I didn't have to stop and think like, what is that point of interest? I already knew through association in this chapter 2, like, oh, okay, that's what points of interest are. Okay, that's what a tactical problem is. That's what a routine problem is. But yeah, that's why it's weird. Because reading this, I'm thinking, I wish I knew what it was talking about first. But then when I got to the explanation, I thought, I'm glad I know what all these little things are that they talked about before. So now it's all starting to come together. So I don't know. Is that a complaint? It sounds like I'm complaining, but I don't feel like I'm complaining. I felt like I wasn't getting the full picture yet, and I wanted the full picture. Maybe it's just the way I learn things. Maybe it's just the way that I prefer to be taught a game. But again, when I got to chapter 3, it was no longer a problem. It was almost like, oh, I'm glad I had that. But when I was reading chapter 2, I'm thinking, please just tell me what it is. I was so tempted to jump ahead to chapter 3 and read it first and come back, just so I knew exactly what they were talking about. Again, maybe it's me just not wanting to feel out of the loop, but I'm going to throw that out there for you. If there's anyone who has the same brain as I do that's reading through it, like, what are you talking about? Just hang in there, stick with it, because you don't really need the details just yet. It's referring to it. Once it gets into it in chapter 3, I think it'll make more sense. Okay, going on. So it goes on to talk about timelines of key events, and it has a whole page showing 8 major events that happened from the start of the war to the end of the war, from Battle of Binary Stars to like the truce that happens on the Klingon homeworld. It has little entries for 8 major moments, and again, a lot of these are going to appear in the campaign itself. It gives you information on running the campaign, the types of missions that you will be in charge of or will be going on during the tactical campaign. And again, reflects back to what I said. It might not make perfect sense right away, but at least you're going to get an idea of this is what's involved in the tactical campaign. And then you're going to learn exactly what it all means in the next chapter. So missions like covert operations, military defense, peacekeeping, rescue, research development, wartime diplomacy, the points of interest that I just mentioned, these are different challenges that are popping up throughout the galaxy or throughout the sectors of this war as this campaign is moving on. And these are the areas that need to be investigated or are the most urgent to be investigated. That's why it's popping up on your tactical display in the game. And these are things that are tactical. Those are the military ones. They are exploration points of interest that are popping up that they might not be directly related to the war, but it might be something that leads to an advantage in the war. Even routine points of interest, because still the Federation has to work. The supply chain has to keep working. You still have to put out all the small fires that is part of running a major government. It can't just all be war. And if that breaks down, it's going to start affecting the resources that are allocated to the war. So it's important to maintain the routine as well. And there's also going to be unknown points of interest that you have no idea what's waiting for you or your assets there as you are conducting this tactical war. So these are really interesting things that are going to be fleshed out on in the next chapter. But each of these are different types of encounters, challenges that are happening because of the war or during the war that you will have a chance to either explore yourself or send assets that you are in control of to take care of. And whether you succeed or fail is going to affect on whether you gain benefits or if things maybe work against you as the war is moving on. So again, details coming very soon. There's random events that are going to also pop up during the tactical campaign and affect things differently depending on what problems they are pertaining to. And it also, I will say, it does have a very convenient turn flow checklist for you to take a look at. So even, I think once you understand the campaign, chapter 2 and 3, you're going to be flipping back between quite frequently as you're running a campaign, because these are really your toolbox chapters about what the tactical campaign is. And one interesting thing that we haven't gone into the missions and the mission briefs just yet, but when you play a mission, when you do a mission brief, when you're doing the actual role play session as part of the tactical campaign, there are some adjustments in this book for the tactical campaign that when you succeed at the mission or if you fail at that session, it will have an effect on the war, granting you bonus if you succeed in what that mission was, or granting you some negative effect if you didn't complete the objectives of your session, that episode that you're running there. What this chapter does, which I think is really nice, it also takes the missions and the mission briefs from the first Discovery campaign book that came out, and it gives them for each one of them, it lists a success and a failure entry. So if you want to take those missions and incorporate them into this campaign to make it an even bigger campaign, or just give you more options of what kinds of missions you want to go on, you now don't even have to think of, oh, what kind of success would this mission grant me in terms of a tactical campaign, or what kind of failure will it give me. This provides exactly for you. So basically doubles the size of missions that you have available for you for the tactical campaign. Because of that, thought that was a really good addition here. So if you have both Discovery books, you have a ton of missions to run the Klingon War now. And then it has a little bit of information about how to avoid burnout, especially since war is a very heavy topic and there's going to be a lot of really dark and traumatic things going on. You do not want the players to be burned out, and you do not want yourself as a GM to get burned out. So how to play the game carefully to make sure everybody's enjoying themselves, and how to pace the game properly. The next thing it has is also pretty interesting. It features notable systems. It gives one major system that's fully explained and fleshed out with all the planets and everything in the system for the Klingon side and for the Federation side, and then two minor systems briefly described and mentioned. So you have this very well-defined area that you could populate as basically the center of your war campaign. So you could become very familiar with these notable systems and utilize them as you're playing the game. It's an option. You don't have to, and of course there's plenty of other locations where you could host it. Or if you're not even doing the Klingon War, you could have your campaign set basically anywhere. So it's up to you make it, but this will give you an example of how you could flesh out a system to really make it come alive to be used in a war where you're going to be focused on a very small area that's a battlefield. It's not stretching across the whole galaxy. So that's a good addition. And it ends with optional rules. Optional rules on how to play the game. Not 100% always for tactical campaign, but this is where I think these optional rules would shine the most. Things like playing an Admiralty game where everybody is either playing Admiral level characters or Admiral and their entourage and running the war from that situation. War profiteering, if you're going to not be doing Starfleet, maybe you're trying to do something a little shadier, something a little underground. How to play the tactical campaign from this situation where, as you'll see in the campaign, you wouldn't really have the assets and the resources to devote to exploration or maintaining Federation routine. So it gives you advice on how to play from this point of view. And of course, Federation-Klingon War, it gives advice on if you're going to play this game from the Klingon perspective, from the Klingon core rulebook, instead of playing as Federation. After that, I'm giving this next optional rule, Red Alert, reactions. I think this is interesting. This is something that probably more old-fashioned traditional role-playing gamers will recognize. Like if you get attacked, you want to react, dive out of the way, you want to jump out of the way. Star Trek Adventures normally does not have that. You just have the narrative system, and you don't really have a acting out of turn to react to something. This adds reactions such as diving for cover into the rules of Star Trek Adventures and how to adapt that. And a situation where you would be in war and there would be a lot of combat, you could imagine that characters or players would not just want to leave their fate to the random difficulty roll. They would want to actively have the chance to avoid taking injury, avoid getting hit. So adding reactions in this traditional role-playing sense was pretty interesting, and I was surprised to see it. So red alert for that rule there. Also some changes to initiative. If you don't want to follow the normal player side always goes first unless GM has a good reason, it gives you a way to set actual initiative order. Again, very similar to a traditional role-playing game style or a classic traditional role-playing game style where everyone has initiative values. There's also a sidebar in here for simplifying multiple ship combat, which I'm sure you can imagine would come up quite often in a war. And the next part, here we go. Not quite black alert, but red alert. This is another new major rule addition that you could apply outside of the tactical campaign as well. I think this is a great addition. This is new way of assigning ship power. And it's explained is it adds a little more crunchiness to the game. It adds a little more fiddliness to combat. But at the same time, this is going to make sure that engineers always have something to do when you're in combat. You're not just waiting for something to break. Engineers, and I would imagine operations officers as well, possibly even science officers, depending on the makeup of your crew. This ship power, this new way of assigning ship power is pretty darn cool, if you don't mind me saying so. You take how much power your ship has, and the engineer would then assign an amount of the ship's full power reserve into each of the departments, and could only go up to what the department value is. So, or not department, so ship systems, okay? So every time, this is only during red alert, during combat actions, that every time that ship system would be used in that battle, in that combat, where that ship would roll for assist, you subtract 1 power off of what was given into that system. So if the engineer thinks, okay, we're going combat, I need to put more power into weapons, or I need to put more power into engines, I need to put more power into sensors, whatever it is. They determine how much power is going into each of the systems. When that system is used for an assist, you take away 1 power. It's drained at least 1 power. If you're using an action or a talent that automatically is using 2-3 points of power, you take that amount away. Otherwise, if it doesn't specify, you're taking 1 power out. If a system does not have enough power to do a task, then you do not get the assist from the starship. So if that system runs out of power, you still get to do the action, you still get to do the task, but the ship no longer helps because that system's out of power. And if a system hits 0 power, it's considered offline, and any task that would use that system now also has its complication range increased. And what the engineer could do, of course, he has actions to try to power management, try to generate more power, or redirect power, pulling it from where they have it in other systems, putting it into the systems that need it. So it becomes a very power management game, which again, engineers, operations officers, those types of characters, they're going to be mini-gaming this throughout a battle to make sure you have the power where you need it. I thought that was awesome. I thought that was really cool. And it also talks about how it works for small craft, because it's a little weird how their power values are and the kind of systems they have, but it gives you rules on how to use it for small craft as well. Stand down, red alert. It goes on to how to do chases and pursuits in the game, because as you can imagine, in war, that situation would come up quite frequently, both on foot and on ship. And it also gives additional rules for how to do stealth and infiltration. Again, kind of similar to adding reactions into the game, where original Star Trek Adventures it's basically a roll against a difficulty. Same thing with stealth, infiltration. Usually it's just rolling your skill against difficulty, whatever it may be. This time, these new rule additions don't make it so black and white that it's either pass or fail. It gives stages of detection. Almost like a stealth video game. So it's an interesting way to really go deeper into a lot of these little side systems that become major components when you're playing something like a tactical campaign. So that is the end of chapter 2. And then here we go. Chapter 3, campaign rules. This is the tactical campaign. Campaign rules, this chapter, black alert. There's no other way to put this. As I said, black alerts for things that are game changing. This changes Star Trek Adventures. This is basically a different game. This is a mini game that's inserted inside of Star Trek Adventures. Maybe I would say spiritually akin to the red alert rules that were in the Operations Division Sourcebook, where it's a different style game that is added inside. This is basically like a real-time strategy game that you are playing as an overlay on top of your Star Trek Adventures role-playing game. So you will start this tactical campaign with kind of a galactic overview of the war. And hotspots are going to break out throughout there. You are going to roleplay in one of them. You and your group are going to choose one of these points of interest, these hotspots that break out, and you're going to play your session in that hotspot, trying to resolve that, having your episode of the war. But there's still all these other hotspots there. So what you do with this galactic overlay, you are more or less like taking the role of commanders of war, admirals. Not necessarily your characters in the game, but as a player group, you are looking at the big picture of the war, and you are going to get assets. These assets can be characters, they can be starships, they could be resources, one-time use resources, and you are going to allocate which assets are going to try to put out these fires, these points of interest across the galaxy, try to slow down the war that's happening. And then you are also going to choose the one that your group is going to jump in and actually role play the session and try to solve that way as your story, as your episode. But the war is going on still. The war is still happening throughout the galaxy. So you can't handle everything. That's why you have assets. And these assets are the big name characters, the big name ships of the time. You'll have things like Admiral Robert April. You'll have M'Benga. You know he was in the war if you saw Strange New Worlds. You know he was in the war if you saw Strange New Worlds Season 2. You have all these very famous, well-known characters from this time period, starships from this time period, and you will randomly get control of, get these assets assigned to you, and you will have to decide together as a group who is best going to serve what type of mission and send them out on it. And these missions are dangerous too. Maybe that asset will not come back. So the tactical campaign is a way of framing an actual role-playing campaign of the war from start to finish, but you have this real-time strategy-esque game over top that you are playing in between, which are called the campaign turns. So going into it in a little more detail, you are going to turn sequence. So you will start phase 1, and that's when you're generating problems. So based on what pace level you set for your campaign, standard would be 5 for the Klingon War. That determines how many of these points of interest are popping up around the galaxy. You're going to roll for them randomly what types of points of interest come up. Or of course, if it makes sense to have a specific type, you could always choose from the chart as well. That is always going to be an option in Star Trek Adventures. You don't need me to tell you that, but just be aware, if it makes more sense, don't roll randomly. Pick the one that you're supposed to for your particular campaign. So you generate these problems, and then as the Admiralty board, all the players will decide how to send all your assets to. The number of assets you get to is also determined by not only the pace that you set for the campaign, but also the amount that's generated at the end of each campaign turn is also derived from whatever the starting pace is of the campaign as well. So you may gain and lose assets as the war goes on. You choose one of these to be your scenario, as I mentioned, and then you move into phase 2. That's where you resolve all these points of interest first. You resolve these problems. So you do that via dice rolls, and these are done pretty much like task rolls. And probably get into that in a little more detail as I go through my notes in a second here. But the assets will have like a power level for, it could be military, it could be medical, personal, science, or social. They'll have a level of power there, and they'll also have like a focus value for that ability. So you would roll the dice as normal, and you would check for successes as usual. Anything under that score is going to count as a success. Anything under their focus value is going to count as 2 successes. You could send a maximum of 2 values to any 1 point of interest. 1 would take the lead, 1 would be an assist. And again, that follows same Star Trek Adventures rules for leads and assists in a task. And you roll for it. If you pass, you cleared the point of interest, the problem, whatever it is. You gain any benefits that you may gain from doing so. If you fail, you suffer whatever the consequences are, if there are any, and chances are they are going to be. So going through after you do that, then once you're done rolling for all the points of interest, you jump into the one that is going to be your session, and you play out your normal Star Trek Adventure session, which is based on the war. And again, this book contains an entire campaign broken into 3 parts: early war, mid-war, late war. And those campaign missions, mission briefs, however you play your game, is going to have success and failure options for how to affect this galactic overlay, this campaign overlay, when the mission is done. After that, phase 3, you determine the outcomes, you clear up everything, you get ready, and you play your next campaign turn, pretty much. So assets, again, like I said, these could be ships, These could be characters, these could be one-time use resources. They'll have their power ratings. Assets like ships, I believe ships and characters, I would have to look again, but at least characters, they will have like a primary skill. So they'll have like the 5 stats: military, social, medical, and all that. But one is their primary. That's what they are good at. It's bolded. So they also get an added benefit that if the task they are doing uses their primary skill, they can re-roll one of their d20s. That's only if they are the lead on it. But basically, you're playing this mini tactical game, controlling the war, managing the Federation's resources during the war, and then you're going in and playing one episode of the war as it's progressing, and it's going to constantly progress from early to mid to late until the scripted event where the war ends, the truce happens. So you are going to take your characters as they are through the war and experience the war on the ground in these adventures, but at the same time you are going to be looking at the bigger picture of what's happening throughout the galaxy, or at least throughout the battlegrounds of this war, and you are going to be determining who is taking care of what, how bad things are getting, trying to put out the worst fires. And it's such an interesting concept. It's not what one ship, one crew is experiencing. You are seeing from the point of view of multiple crews. And of course, there's even options of you could play a different crew every time. Maybe you'll take over one of your assets and say you want to roleplay as them, and you use your original ship as the replacement asset instead, and you send them off to do something, and then now next mission you play as the crew of a ship that previously was one of your assets. I mean, there's a lot of ways to adapt it to however you like, but I just thought it was really a clever way of making a war campaign stand out from a regular role-playing campaign. Okay, just regrouping and getting another drink of water because my throat is not holding up. But anyhow, yeah, when you play this campaign, or when you play the tactical overlay of this tactical campaign, you're also, in addition to anything else that's happening from the resolution of these points of interest, you are gaining campaign momentum, which is different from player momentum. It's used to spend things for like the task rolls in the campaign itself, in the tactical campaign itself with your assets. It can be used for buying more assets. It can be used to re-roll dice. Very similar to how momentum may be used for a player in the normal sessions. But in addition to that, by accomplishing certain points of interest, by solving certain problems like exploration, they might not be as urgent as the tactical ones where the enemy is growing in strength and it's going to make things worse for you if you ignore it. If you accomplish an exploration point of interest, an exploration challenge, that's going to give you progression points, a lot of progression points, and every 5 progression points you earn throughout the campaign, you can then spend afterwards to try to earn more benefits, maybe more assets, things like that. So there are ways of upgrading, of adding to your assets, of reusing assets, of trying to get back lost assets if you roll a loss on one of them. There's so many details that make this a very fun, but not too complicated, additional mini game that your entire group can play, in addition to getting to experience the actual personal details of doing one of the missions. I really think this is such a unique and amazing addition to Star Trek Adventures as a role-playing game. It's a completely different style of playing the game. Really, really cool. Now, the campaign, it takes place in 3 stages. As I said, early war, mid-war, late war, and they basically include 2 scripted events, 2 missions, and then 8 mission briefs. but you play 3 campaign turns, and then the next the next scripted event is triggered. So it's pretty much campaign turn 3, scripted event, campaign turn 6, then scripted event, campaign turn 9, scripted event. So you follow that pattern to get through the scripted events. So you know the war has a definite beginning and end, and there are those moments that are unchangeable in between. You are playing the details that happen between those moments. This is what your crew is affecting. And one other little thing, I will give a yellow alert on top of the black alert. If you are a Captain's Log player, if you are a solo player, it also has a little bit of advice in here on how to play solo. So for those of you, which I know Captain's Log is huge, it has advice on how to incorporate this as a solo game. And one other interesting thing is, you could even play the tactical campaign, the tactical overlay, without doing the whole role playing. You could just, if you want to just gather around, play like an Admiralty level, you're sitting at the starbase and you're sending assets out, doing this, doing that. You could play just the tactical aspect with none of the role playing, or none of the scenario role playing, but just role playing with each other, trying to determine which points of interest, which problems to go against. There are many ways that you could play this game. That's why it's a game changer. It's definitely what the black alert on this channel is designed for. It's something else. You really have to, it sounds complicated at first, but I think once you read through it and with the examples provided, it makes sense. Wow. Simply wow. Stand down, black alert. We are on the opposite side of the galaxy by this point. That is nuts. Now the rest of the book, this is going to, the review is pretty much over. I've already covered the next 3 chapters just by talking here. Chapter 4 is the early war, and this starts with the battle at the binary stars scripted event, where you're going to hear about it. You're going to play your missions. You're going to get to the next scripted event, and then you're going to move into chapter 5, mid-war. Mid-war has, again, two scripted events, 2 missions included, 8 mission briefs. You don't have to play all of these. These are just what you're playing in between, or what you're choosing from, whatever affects where your character wants to go. But the missions, of course, those are the most fleshed out. Those are the most detailed. Those are the most major moments. So I think your crew will want to play the missions at the very least, regardless of how many mission briefs they want to cover as well. And then chapter 6, late war, same exact thing. You're going to play through the missions. You're going to have a campaign turn of saying things out in between every single one, and you're going to do that up until you hit the scripted scenario of the truce at Kronos, and then that's it. Chapter 4, 5, and 6, those are all of the missions in the campaign. So you pick and choose the ones you want, the ones that fit what your players want to do, what you want to do, and you just go through there. There's not much more I can say about that without reading through and spoiling what those missions are. So let's move on to Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is Starships. Starships, first of all, it talks about fleets in the war, and it describes what the fleets are for the Federation, what is the first fleet, the second fleet, and what are the fleets like in the Klingon Empire as well, and how it reflects the great houses and the minor houses. So basically how those 2 navies are built and set up. And now the heavy rain starts here, so maybe it's picking up on the mic. Downpour recently, so ignore it. It then lists a bunch of Federation starships, so Federation space frames, plus a key ship from that era, and I believe they are all assets that you could use too, as well as being listed here. Now, the Federation starships, you have all the ships of that time, most of the ships of that time period. Not the majority of them are also in the original Discovery campaign guide. A couple of them are not, like the Daedalus class, the Intrepid class. Those you can find in Utopia Planitia. The Scout type, it was just called Scout type. I don't know where else that may have appeared. I don't recall seeing it elsewhere. I don't believe it's in Discovery book, and I do not believe it's in Utopia Planitia, so I'm not sure exactly. Also, Constitution class of this era as they appeared in Utopia Planitia. Rest of them are all the ships that you can find in the Discovery book: Walker class, Shepard class, McGee class, Cardenas, all those ones. No Crossfield class, however, the USS Discovery, because of course there should be no other Crossfields there at that time. But goes into Klingon ships next. And the Klingon ships also, majority of them are in the Discovery book, like the, am I going to be going to Klingon pronunciation here, or just saying it like the ek, the bat, there we go. So all those ones that appeared, and the ones that did not appear, or I couldn't find, D5, the Raptor, the D7 Katinga was not in there, and also the D6, which it's described as a prototype. There's only one of them, so it makes sense that it didn't appear in the other book, and no image of it in this book as well. But the D6 prototype, it would be a unique ship for the Klingon Empire in this side. They also have two Nakjej ships here. They're almost the same, but it's two different named versions of them in there. I think it's possibly for generating assets if you're playing from the Klingon side. Otherwise, I thought it was strange to include two of the exact same class of ship, and not even side by side at different points through there. But I'm guessing it's for creating assets and having named assets in your game if you're playing from the Klingon side. And finally, Chapter 8 is the Allies and Adversaries chapter. This is all the NPCs that can be used as assets, that appear as assets, and also that you may want to have appear in your game, from famous characters, major characters, to others that are very appropriate for this setting. And after the final chapter, you have the appendices, which has the campaign tracker for the GM. It allows you to list all the details of the points of interest, keep track of them as the campaign turns are going on. It has the player campaign tracker, so the players can keep track of all their assets. And it has a very nice safety checklist that you could have players fill out, so they could list exactly what they're comfortable, uncomfortable with, what is okay, what's a maybe, and what's a definite no. We do not need this in the game at all. So that's something, again, for a sensitive topic such as war, that you could pass out to your players. And that is the Federation-Klingon War Tactical Campaign. This book, like literally, as I said, game changer. This is adding an entirely new way of playing the game. And it fits perfectly. When I read it, I was so excited. I wanted to try it, but it's not going to fit into my campaign as it is now. Where we're at now, maybe I could get some ideas from it, but there's no way I could do the tactical campaign right now. But I want to so bad. Perhaps my next campaign, when we're done with Star Trek Next Frontier, maybe I'll play a tactical campaign. It's going to be awesome, but I love the idea. And I'm going to try and incorporate as much of it as I can, but I don't think I can use the whole thing as it is right away. But I could see the potential for modifying it, for adapting it to other settings and situations. And I'm also coming up with ideas for just a scenario to write up that utilizes the tactical campaign. It is one of the most exciting, it's probably the most different thing added to Star Trek Adventures since Captain's Log, and Captain's Log is a different game altogether. This is the biggest change, the biggest addition to Star Trek Adventures since its launch, I would say. I'm very confident in saying that. And I think this is far more suitable and far more useful than the previous Odd Man Out, the Red Alert role system for miniatures combat. which I don't think works all that well for a narrative game. This does, because it allows the narrative to be maintained. Also, with the tactical campaign, the assets, you should be narrating what they are doing too, not just like that went there, rolled 6 that went there, rolled 6. You should be narrating who that person is going, what happened on that planet. Players, of course, can always chime in because they're the ones sending them there. There's so much about this that is perfect for Star Trek Adventures, but perfect for this particular setting, a war setting. Now, I did remember, and I'm going to try to be brief because the video is already ultra long, but this was a massive book I had to get through. Apologies. But I'm calling another alert. I'm going my soapbox alert. Call the ambulance. Now, what I didn't say at the beginning, because I know I might ramble on too long. Recently, there's just, especially when this book just was announced and it got released, you get the same thing again on the social media. Fortunately, not too vile. There's a lot of people who hate Discovery. I know that. I used to be one of them. I know that. I was very disappointed by it, and I want nothing to do with it. And you get that now. This was announced. It said, oh, this looks nice, but there's no way I'm buying a Discovery book. This is not a Discovery book. This is a Star Trek Adventures book. It uses an element that comes from Star Trek Discovery because it is Star Trek, and the game is Star Trek Adventures. This is the most recent war we love. I know I love the Dominion War. I would love if this book was Dominion War, but that was 30 years ago. I almost did the Rick James thing. I'm not going to say that quote. I try not to swear on this channel. That was 30 years ago, friend. 25 years ago, 30 years ago. The Klingon War, that was just a few years back. That is in the current generation of televised Star Trek. That is what new fans coming in are very familiar with. They don't have to dive back 30 years and watch 7 seasons of Deep Space Nine to see the greatest television series ever. They don't have to. They should. They don't have to. It makes sense to use that now because it's still coming up in Strange New Worlds. It is affecting the story for Nurse Chapel, for M'Benga. It is a major part of modern Star Trek. It makes sense that they use the Klingon War, but you don't have to. You could take this, you could file the numbers off all the assets and put Dominion War people in there, Dominion War ships in there for your assets. You could make it a future thing, some completely new war. Put your own assets in there. This is a resource kit for Star Trek Adventures. It has the Discovery title because Discovery is still Star Trek. The Klingon War is Star Trek. There's no reason to get mad at Star Trek Adventures because you didn't like the series. In fact, it was the original, and I mentioned this before, but I know most people did not see it because anyone that doesn't like Discovery is not watching anything that I talk about Discovery in. So, in the last Discovery Sourcebook, the Discovery Campaign, that book is still one of my maybe top 3 Star Trek sourcebooks, or Star Trek Adventures sourcebooks. I love it. It is one of the best books in the series, and I bought it when I did not want anything to do with Discovery. And I was one of the ones, I was one of the people, the same people said, it's Discovery. I don't need it. It's the only STA book I'm not going to buy. And for a while, it was. But then I heard people talk about it. I heard continuing conversations talk about it. Like, you know what? I do want to read those elements. And I got the book. I read it. Not only did it add so much good information to my own Star Trek campaign that I thought that is a great piece to just slip into my game. And I rewrote the game that was coming up like that day. They incorporate it. Not only that, but it also covered details that when I watched the first season of Discovery and I didn't really like because I didn't really seem to fit with me, it expressed it in a way that sort of reconciled it with my own knowledge of what I consider to be the usual standard Trek in my mind. The writers of these books know what they are doing. They know how to express it, and they know they can't explicitly say this equals that, or this makes sense because you could consider it this. They write it in the way that when you're reading it, your own mind makes this connection. Like, oh yeah, that's not so far off, is it? That makes really good sense. And for me, it made me want to go back and finish Discovery. And I did. And guess what? It wasn't half as bad as I heard people saying it. Still, I'm not going to get into the series. Forget. I have a review out on that. You can watch it. You're not going to, but you can. That's the point. You can watch it. So I'm not going to go into those details. The point is, do not write off this book because it has Discovery on it, even if you don't like Discovery. There's a lot I don't like in Star Trek. There's still a lot in Discovery I don't like, but I love this book. I love the first campaign book. This is a Star Trek Adventures product. This is something that is going to enhance your game no matter where you're running it. Don't let the title confuse you. The Lower Decks book isn't all about the Lower Decks series. It's about the concepts introduced, seen in Lower Decks, and how you can apply it to Star Trek Adventures as a whole. All of these books are to be applied to any time, any setting, anything for your particular flavor of Star Trek. There's no reason to ignore this because of a specific name on it. You don't have to be that petty like I was. Okay? Give it a chance. Ignore the fact that you don't like the TV series that the name is on it. Look at the value it adds to your game. That's all I have to say. Stand down, Soapbox Alert. All right. This is ultra long, super long, but I hope it was informative because this book is amazing and I regret I cannot use it, at least not to its fullest. It's probably going to be years before I get to that point with how infrequent my group can go through the campaign, but oh, I love it. I love what I read. I think they hit a home run here. Captain Sisko would be proud. So thank you for watching. If you got this far, clearly you fell asleep with YouTube playing. So thank you very much. And as always, I will catch you next time. So stay safe out there, my friends. Live long and prosper. Peace and long life. I'll see you.